Hi, I'm Todd Henderson. Today we're going to install the True Edge rivet style fender flares on this 2014 Silverado. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're on the passenger side. We're starting with the front fender flare. Now, what we would normally do is we'd remove the front mudguard. That front mudguard has already been removed because this truck's gotten a lift and some larger wheels and tires, and that happened at that point in time. But this screw, which held on that front mudguard, we're going to need to use that for the install. So we're going to use a T15 Torx bit, and we're going to remove that screw. Okay, so now we're going to take our painted fender flare, and we're going to take real special precaution not to scratch anything on the paint on the flare. We're going to set it in place. The front end of the fender flare goes above the bumper lip. So we're going to just set that in place, dry fit it for right now, and where that screw came out that we took out before, we're going to slide right over top of that where the fender flare goes in place. And we're going to put the screw back in, but we're not going to tighten it down at this point. This is just for dry fitting purposes. Next, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and lift up the fender flare, make sure it's oriented properly to where it ends at the end of the painted portion of the truck. Then we're going to go up underneath with a grease pencil, and where there are holes in the fender flare, we're actually going to hold the fender flare up against the fender, and then we're going to take the grease pencil and mark on the inside of that hole. And there's going to be 5 holes all the way along. So each one, we just want to make sure it's pressed in place and mark those holes. Now we can go ahead and remove this screw. We're going to pull the fender flare away. All right, now here's our first mark. This is the very front of the truck. Now what we need to do is, you can see I've got my fingernail kind of holding the 16mm point right at the edge of the fender. This is our baseline mark, so what we need to do is go 16mm in and make a mark right here. And that will actually be where we drill our hole. We're going to do 16mm in on the first 2 locations. On all the rest of the locations, we're going to go 12mm in. All right, now all of our marked locations, we're going to use a 3/32 drill bit, and we're going to drill a pilot hole. All right, next on the flare itself, where we have our holes, we're going to use our supplied Torx head bolts. We're going to go through some washers. Now, whenever you look at your washer, washers are stamped out, so you got kind of a smooth side. You have a side that's kind of a rough side, kind of the more cutting side. So you want to actually have it going through the cutting side, so the smooth side is actually what's touching your paint. Then take and insert that into the hole. Now, since this has been painted, we got a little bit of paint on the exterior, so I'm going to use the provided Torx bit. I was going to use that to kind of thread it down into that hole. Once it's in place, I'm going to take the supplied nylock nut. I'm going to thread it onto the back side of that bolt. Next, I'm going to take a 5/16 socket. I'm going to grab the supplied Torx bit. I'm going to slide it into that 5/16 socket and then into that Torx bolt. And from the bottom, I'm going to use a 1/2" socket, and I'm going to tighten it from the bottom. Now I'm going to be careful to hold it still on the top so it's not spinning on the top. We only want it to spin on the bottom. All right, now I've got it tightened down. I don't want to over tighten that. I also don't want it to spin on top. That way we preserve the paint. Over tightening or allowing that to spin will mess up the paint and chip it and fracture the paint on top. We're going to do that with all the holes. All right, so now we're going to install our edge trim. The edge trim goes on just like the same way on every single fender flare. So what we're going to do, just the places where the fender flare is actually going to touch the paint, on that edge, we're going to attach the edge trim. The tape portion goes to the inside of the fender flare, and the other portion, the hook portion, goes to the outside. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of spread that apart, get that kind of hooked into place, and we're just going to start working that around a little bit. We're going to get about a foot worth of edge trim kind of pinched in place. We're going to keep pressure against the flare so it doesn't slip off. And once we've got that kind of up in place for a little bit, we're going to go ahead and flip this over. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keep pressure on the edge trim up here, and we're going to peel this portion back. We're going to take a little bit of that red 3M tape. We're going to peel that away. And then we're going to push that back on and squeeze down to make sure it gets proper adhesion. Now before we started this, just so you know, we also wiped this all down with rubbing alcohol to make sure we got any contaminants off. Now while I'm holding that edge trim down, I'm going to start peeling the tape away in a downward motion, so I'm not pulling it away from the flare, I'm pulling it down to the flare. And then I go back and I put some pressure to make sure I get good adhesion up to the flare. And so we're just going to continue on with it. So this is the most tedious part. When it's done, it's all worth it. And once you're done, just go ahead and trim the excess. All right, now we're going to take that same fender flare, we're going to line it back in place. We're going to use our screw that held the mudguard on, line that up. We're not going to tighten that all the way down at this time. We're just going to set that in place. Take our self-tapping screw that's provided. Now we're going to go back through and tighten all of our screws, making sure we keep pressure against the, from the flare against the body. All right, now we got the front fender fastened, the opposite fender installed is exactly the same way. Let's go ahead and jump to the back. All right, next we're going to take off the mud flap that goes on the front of the wheel well. Once that mud guard's out of the way, we can discard it. All right, now we're going to the rear plastic trim, also with a T15. This screw we're also going to retain. This will be part of the install as well. Now underneath here, we're going to have two push pins that hold the last part of this trim piece on. We're going to need to pop those off. Now, you don't want to really pry on those. This is the push pin up at the top side. You can just reach inside with a pair of pliers, squeeze that together, and it'll pop right out. All right, once that's down, we just kind of pull on a little bit, slide it forward, pops right off of these clips. We can discard that. All right, so now we've got our fender flare for the rear. We've gone ahead and put on all the bolts. We've already gone and put the edge trim on it. We're gonna go ahead and line it up to the holes on the bottom. All right, now these are the two places where we took the screws out for the mud guard. We're gonna slide this hole on the bottom, this is the rear portion. We're gonna slide it up to go over top of that hole. And we're going to temporarily put that screw in, but not tight yet. And the factory screw that came out of this spot, we're going to slide that in and also put that in, but not tight. what we're going to do is we're going to take and push the fender flare in place. We're going to have 5 spots on the fender flares where there's a little oval hole. What we're going to do is we're going to take our clip and that's going to slide over top of the sheet metal on the fender. We're going to slide that in place like so, and then make sure that we're not forcing the clip off with the flare itself. Then push the clip to where the threaded portion is directly underneath the hole. And we're going to take one of our supplied machine screws, put that up in place. Now for all the rest of the holes, we also want to slide in the clips over top of the holes. Just like the front, we're going to make sure that we've got everything lined up. We're going to place pressure on the outside of the flare as we tighten up the screws. All right, so if you have larger wheels and tires, you want to go ahead and get inside the truck, turn the wheels backwards and forwards, do whatever kind of necessary trimming, and that concludes the install. If you have any questions, call the experts. We're here to help you out.